There are just 79 days, folks, until Election Day. And this week's Democratic Convention in Chicago is a golden opportunity for Democrats to elevate Vice President Kamala Harris as the party's standard bearer. And new this morning, we are learning how each night of the convention will highlight her vision for the country. Tomorrow's opening night's theme, For the People. Tuesday will outline Democrats' bold vision for America's future. Wednesday, they're calling a fight for our freedoms. And Thursday, when Harris takes the stage, a message for our future. Meanwhile, the Harris-Walz campaign is getting ready to unleash their war chest. The campaign says it will spend at least $370 million on television and digital ads between Labor Day and the election. Joining us now from Chicago is Harris-Walz Principal Deputy Campaign Manager Quentin Fulks. Quentin, thank you for getting up early, okay, because Chicago is an hour behind D.C., so we appreciate you.
We definitely do, Quentin. No, man, I know what that's like with the convention looming right in front of you in 24 hours. And the announcement this morning of the themes. Talk to us about these themes because, you know, they seem to go to a space that, to be honest, the country hasn't been in a long while. Talking about its future. There's been a lot of backward thinking and looking, particularly from the Republican side of things. How did these themes come together, and what do they say about what the vice president wants America to know about her and her vision for America?
Well, good morning. Thank you all for having me. Look, I think that these themes perfectly encapsulate the vice president's vision for the country. For the people is going to talk about who we're fighting for. The vice president says this all the time. It's very important that the people understand that they are at the center of all of this. The reason that she pushes these policies to lower costs are because of the people. We have to also talk about the future in a different way of doing things with common sense approaches, with stability. And that's what Vice President Harris is going to bring to the ticket and continue to make sure that we protect and fight for our freedoms, which is a stark contrast between Donald Trump and J.D. Vance and their Extreme Project 2025 agenda. And I think throughout the convention, you're going to hear stories that talk about the vice president's record of fighting and delivering for the American people as a prosecutor, attorney general, a senator, and the vice president. And I think that those things perfectly encapsulate that.
And Quentin, some of that work will happen at the convention, some of it, of course, happening with paid media. I want to take a listen to one of the radio spots that the campaign has out, largely biographical about the vice president.
Standing up for everyday Americans is at the very foundation of who Kamala Harris is. Raised in a middle-class home by a working mother who instilled in her a passion for justice and equality. That's why when Kamala Harris became district attorney, she stood up for our kids, keeping them safe by prosecuting sex offenders. She also pioneered a program to give nonviolent drug offenders a second chance. As president, Kamala Harris will continue the fight for everyday Americans.
You talk to any of the pollsters, you talk to people who are doing focus groups, a big thing you hear, you know this, is I like her, I want to hear more, right? They still have gaps in their understanding of who Vice President Harris is. How much of that is biographical? How much of that is filling in the policy gaps about what a Harris administration would actually look like?
It is both. But as I mentioned in my first answer, I think that it's very important that people understand why the vice president is pushing for these policies. She grew up with a working mother who rented most of their lives. And so when she talks about things like making housing and renting more affordable, it's because she lives that. And so, yes, the policy proposals and the specifics on that are as important because at the end of the day, this is about how she is going to change the lives for everyday Americans. But as we are introducing her, it is incredibly important that we make sure that people understand where those values come from and why those values are ingested. And so our campaign has aggressively started spending to make sure that we are defining the vice president early because we have a short amount of time. Right. We have to introduce her to a lot of America, and ads like the ones you just played are exactly how we're going to do that.
Quentin, one aspect of this that I've been fascinated by is the reaction of the press, the media. The hard press by many to get the vice president to sit down with them as if to say, this isn't legitimate until you talk to us.
Also, as if Joe Biden wasn't the nominee like a month ago.
Exactly. So, the expectations of turning that corner, to me, has been really amusing to watch and hear many in the media sort of go after the vice president because she hasn't done that face to face. But what my response has been is, she seems to be talking directly to the people. In other words, I don't need to sit down with the media and the press to do a one-on-one if I have the opportunity to have this larger conversation in which I can more directly define myself. Was that a legitimate, not legitimate, the wrong word, was that an intentional effort to sort of push past the noise of Washington press corps and all of that drama to have this more direct conversation? Because it seems to be thematically where you're going, a more direct approach and conversation with the American people.
Well, look, we entered this convention with a lot of enthusiasm and momentum. And that enthusiasm and momentum is because Vice President Harris and Governor Walz have been out on the ground talking to and communicating directly with voters. And, Michael, you said it basically, but I'll say it a different way. The Vice President has been interviewing. She's been interviewing with the American people. And she respects the free media, respects the press. And so that will come on her time. But right now, our focus is making sure that we're communicating with the voters, that they see her, that they understand her worldview, her perspective, her upbringing, her record of delivering and fighting for American families to protect their freedoms, and her vision for moving forward. And so Vice President Harris is going to continue to do that. They're kicking off a bus tour today, going throughout Pennsylvania. They're going to be in a rally in Wisconsin tomorrow before they head into the convention. And so we're incredibly excited to continue to stay out on the road in the battleground states, talking to the voters who are ultimately going to decide this election and making sure that they understand that this race is fundamentally a choice between two stark visions for the future of this country, one where we're lowering costs, protecting freedoms, and continuing to deliver for the American people, and one that is a extreme, unstable Project 2025 agenda that is led by Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
You know, Quentin, it strikes me, you know, I don't know much, okay, but it strikes me that at this point in the cycle, given the switch, Vice President Harris now at the top of the ticket, when she sits down for an interview, she would have needed to have some policies, because I would assume that our colleagues in the press and us as well, we would like to ask her about those policies. And we have now seen some of those policies begin to roll out. The vice president rolled out a part of her economic policy earlier this week of her campaign and what she would do if elected president. There has been some criticism of the policy because people are assuming, and some Republicans, some economists, even some, you know, moderate Democrats are assuming that what the policy is when it comes to price gouging is really about price caps. But I read it as it is if you are price gouging, then we will hold you accountable. Can you just speak to these two pieces of that? Because I do think the prices and what's happening at the grocery store and the inflation, these record profits that these companies are making, yet the pandemic, people are recovering from the pandemic, the companies are definitely recovering, yet the prices are not going down, is in fact an issue that the American people absolutely care about.
I'm glad you asked the question, Simone. Look, these are capitalist, market-based solutions that the vice president is putting forward. The vice president believes that businesses should be able to make money. But what the vice president does not believe is that these businesses should be able to make money simply because. When prices go up simply because of the law of supply and demand, that is completely fine. Those are the laws of economics. But when prices are just jacked up just so that corporations and big businesses can increase quarterly profits or yearly profits on the back of middle-class families and small businesses, that is where the vice president is going to step in, and that is what she has demonstrated that she has been willing to do. This isn't something that is partisan. You see state attorney generals in places like Texas and Louisiana filing cases against companies that do this, jacking up gas prices during Hurricane Harvey, going after beef competitors. One of the biggest, it's the fact that they are raising prices simply because there is no competition. There's nowhere else to get beef. Pharmacy benefit managers are doing it. And so what you see Vice President Harris saying is that she is not going to let corporations just raise prices simply because. If prices go up because of the law on supply and demand, then we will deal with that. But companies just raising prices simply because they can do it is not something that Vice President Harris is going to stand for. And I think she's laid out a very clear agenda proposal to do it. And so the demagoguing that's coming from Republicans know that this isn't about fixed prices. In fact, I think that there is reason to believe that Vice President Harris is going to work across the aisle in a bipartisan fashion to make sure, and this is something that we know polls extremely well, something that the voters have been asking for, and this is a common sense solution to deliver that. And so Donald Trump and Republicans Republicans should stop playing games and come to the table and work with Vice President Harris to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the people, not just trying to win a political campaign.
Quinton, real quick, you talked about the bus tour through Pennsylvania. As you guys know, 2020, President Biden, Vice President Harris, they won the state by just over 1%. And that was in part by driving up margins in solidly blue counties. You're doing some of that, but you're also going into Beaver County and trying to chip away there at Donald Trump's would-be lead. What is the message to folks in a county like Beaver?
That this campaign is inclusive, that Vice President Harris and Governor Walz's administration will be inclusive, and that they're fighting for all Americans, regardless of if your county votes red or if your county votes blue. You all know that this is my whole ethos. I bring this from me coming from a rural county myself, a small town in Georgia. It's the strategy that I implemented for Senator Warnock, and I think that it is something that we have to do. In order for Democrats to win places, they have to go there. We have to show up. We have to talk to people, and we have a vision for this country that includes people that live in these rural communities, in these small towns, and we have to go and communicate that. When we don't, we just cede the argument to the Republicans and their extreme agenda, and that is what these voters believe. And so we're going directly at that, and we're going to continue to talk to these voters and voters all across the country, no matter where you live, red states, blue states, rural counties, urban counties or not, suburbs as well, because that's how you run a campaign, and that's the work that the Vice President and Governor Walz are going to continue to do.
And to add to the urgency, it might be 7 to 9 days until Election Day, but it is only 29 days until early voting begins in the state of Pennsylvania. Quinton Fulks, as always, thank you for getting up early and being with us.